As we've been reporting, President Trump does seem perfectly at ease with keeping the government shut down. And now it seems this could be part of a larger strategic play, at least according to some leaks. The Daily Beast spoke with a source close to the White House who says, look, the more the focus is on the wall, the more Pelosi's forced to focus on this fight instead of the investigations. Now, is that even true? Well, let's get into it. Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee, who is on the Judiciary Committee, a key investigative committee, which will be busy with, of course, a new Attorney General nominee, along with a lot of other things. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Good to be with you, Ari.
Is it true, that claim there that I just read?
Absolutely not. The Judiciary Committee will be active, as will the Government Oversight Committee, in looking into the abuses of this administration, which have been unlooked into for the last 2 years when the Republicans were complicit and derelict of duty.
When you see, as we were covering in the earlier segment, the reports that Trump advisors think, well, maybe this will rain on Pelosi's parade next week. What is your response to that, and how do you think she, as your leader, should handle that?
You can't rain on the parade of a person who's becoming the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives for the second time. That hasn't happened very often in history. And a lady who was the first female Speaker becoming the first female Speaker to get the speakership back. It's an historic occasion, and she should be treated as the Ruth Bader Ginsburg of legislators. She's a phenomenal woman. She's a phenomenal speaker and legislator. She's smart, she's courageous, and she can run circles around Donald Trump, and she's liable to expose him in such ways that he will be shocked.
Strong
He's
words.
met his match.
Strong words, and I know she does have a lot of experience. I know you're a close ally. On the stakes of the shutdown, when people say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't that bad in the holiday week, or we showed some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle saying they'll keep going months till hell freezes over, quote unquote. What do you say to people who want to know, well, who does this affect, and how does this affect everyday people?
Well, it affects working people. It affects people who work for the government and who provide services for people and the Americans who need services. The courts are closed down in the United States. Attorneys have told litigants that their cases won't be heard and they'll be put off because they can't even work voluntarily. There will be hardships on Americans and hardships on American citizens, and Trump doesn't care. All he cares about is himself. He didn't care about his subcontractors when he ripped them off. He didn't care about people that he had in Trump University and ripped them off. He's Mr. Bad Example, as my buddy Warren Zevon would have called him. That's what he is. And he's doing that. He did it in private industry. He's doing it as president. He got away with 2 years without any oversight and when he had Nunez and Goodlatte running over there and doing his bidding and embarrassing the House of Representatives. Well, that's over. We got Nadler, we got Elijah Cummings, we got Adam Schiff, we got Nancy Pelosi, and we got Steve Cohen. And it's not going to be the same time, and he can say what he wants about him being tough, and he knows how to be tough. We know how to deal with bullies. We stand up to them.
You said Warren Zevon. Didn't he also do bring lawyers, guns, and money?
How was I to know she was with the Russians, too?
Wow.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
Some of these references, they become more apt as time goes on, but there's great wisdom in those lyrics. Before I let you go, Congressman, we talked about the investigations. You say the president's wrong to think the shutdown would get in the way. So what do you see as the priority for you on the Judiciary Committee and your colleagues when you take over next week?
Every indication is I will be the chair of the subcommittee that deals with the Constitution and civil rights and civil liberties. And we will have talked to Chairman Nadler, and I think one of our first hearings will be on the emoluments clause and the shredding of the Constitution and the congressional responsibility and duty to approve or not approve of foreign payments to the president. That's something that shouldn't be, and the Founding Fathers knew it. We'll get into that. We'll look at voting rights. And that's an important issue for us, and renewing the Voting Rights Act and having hearings to have a record. We'll look into the pardon power, I believe, and see how far that can go, and if there are examples of academicians who feel that the pardon power is not unlimited if it's used to obstruct justice or used for members of the president's family or for himself. So those are some of the areas, but I'm sure we'll be looking into a lot more, and I'm sure Richie and Neal at Ways and Means will be looking into seeing his taxes and find out just how much he paid in taxes, or if he got a refund. We very easily could have lost money with Donald Trump. I mean, it might be beyond a refund. It may be the only time where somebody conned us out of more money than they were even due back.
All very fascinating stuff. Congressman, again, thanks for spending time with us tonight.
Good to be with you, Ari, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.